The 227th day of the war, the U.S. president called Vladimir Putin. The conversation did not lead to anything. A gift in the form of a stop to help Ukraine did not lead to progress. Trump himself, for the first time after talking to Putin, who was already a lot, openly said that he was not satisfied and there was no progress. What surprises him is not clear. The Russian dictator understands only power and Trump demonstrates only weakness in his attitude. Well, so that even before that, a few hours after the conversation, Russia carried out a record attack on Ukraine with rockets and drones. As for the cancellation of American supplies to Kyiv, the situation is still quite confused. So far, there is no 100% certainty that this was a conscious decision of the U.S. authorities. It is more and more similar to another mess inside the Pentagon. We will not guess, we will wait for Trump's conversation with Zelensky. Meanwhile, Ukraine continues to strike point strikes on Russia and the number goes to quality. Details of the last few strikes are becoming known. Russian officers are kicked out in packs, including generals. It is also possible to hit the most important objects of the VPK. And the PVO and the former mayor of Luhansk was eliminated. The special services of Ukraine reported that an explosive device was used. Minus another collaborator. At the front, the VSU continues counterattacks in the Sumy region and the Russian offensive looks quite specific. So far, the only direction where at least something significant in southern Donetsk is successful is the rest. Big losses and not very impressive results. And ADI-SKRF is able to withstand exclusively thanks to the incredible action of the fighters of the Ukrainian Defense Force. At the same time, the USU is increasingly focused on the murder of Russian drone operators. This is a very effective tactic that will allow Ukraine to retain an advantage in the low sky and bring the construction of an effective line of drones closer, which are slowly being connected to ground samples. They know how to surprise. In the third assault, they demonstrated the capabilities of ground drones. One of them stole a machine gun from the Russian position. About this and much more in today's fresh report. You can support it with your likes, comments, and subscription to the channel. All these actions help promote the video, especially your subscriptions. They are important for YouTube algorithms. Well, if you want to support the channel financially, then you can do it on Patreon, the link to which is in the description. And by buying NVPN, this is a means of bypassing blockages that allows you to watch YouTube at normal speed, use Twitter, Instagram, and go to blocked resources. You can buy it by the link in the description. It is legal in Russia to use and buy VPNs. While buying NVPN, you support this channel because it is my VPN and I am responsible for it too. Well, we move on to what happened in the past 24 hours. The author of the channel collected everything that is known about stopping the supply of American ammunition. From his post, the least bad version of the development of events is drawn. Although, of course, there's little good in it either. In the administration of Trump, there's a mess. Left hand does not know what the right does, and against this background, all sorts of evil-tempered anti-Ukrainian actors get the opportunity to carry out their own policy behind the back of the president and the half-dead Council of National Security. The Tsar is not very good, but the boyars are generally monstrous. This is what Tilly would have learned. All that is known at this moment about the stoppage of the supplies of American weapons in Ukraine. He writes from what he read in The Economist, CBS News, and Politico. Supplies stopped on the night of June 30th to July 1st. There were no notifications. Politico was the first to find out about the shutdown of the supplies only by the late evening of Tuesday. Ukrainian officials say that all supplies of American weapons, including ammunition and even spare parts, have been suspended. American officials deny this. White House officials say that assistance was suspended by other countries during the transfer of reserves to warehouses. At the same time, it is still unknown which other countries the assistance was suspended by. The White House did not name them. Also, the White House does not comment on how long the delay will last. This raises Ukraine's suspicions about the end of the decision. The decision to stop aid has affected not only Ukraine and Europe, but also congressmen and even government officials. High-ranking Republicans are concerned about the role of one particular person in the Pentagon, who has had an excessive influence on this decision. As you know, this is Pentagon Deputy Minister for Political Affairs Elbridge Colby, which I have repeatedly told you about. Even Donald Trump supporters were irritated by this decision, as Colby did not warn anyone in the presidential administration, says Beautilly. Only one example. Congressman from South Carolina, Joe Wilson, is an ardent supporter of Trump and at the same time is an expert in foreign policy. A member of the House of Representatives for the Armed Forces wrote in a tweet the following. Following the tremendous success of the president in achieving the goal of 5% defense spending for NATO allies and his provocative statements about the PVO and future cooperation, I am deeply concerned that the Ministry of Defense is undermining President Trump's agenda through force, stopping the supply of weapons to Ukraine, including through the third country. As a senior member of the Committee on the Armed Forces from the Republican Party, I note that many of the specified systems are currently not used in the United States, and others are produced with the use of only a small part of the existing production capabilities. I urge the Minister of Defense to reconsider this decision. Putin insults and ridicules President Trump, refusing negotiations and senselessly dragging the world into destruction and destruction, as written by Wilson. God save the conservatives like Wilson and Graham. Where would we be without them now? Well, let's continue with the post B, or what the situation looks like from the inside. The decision did not coordinate with the National Security Council in any way. He writes, whose role after the dismissal of Michael Waltz was reduced to a minimum. Now his executive duty is Marco Rubio, but that's enough work in other areas. The pro-Ukrainian Republican from Texas Mike McCall publicly accused Colby. I think that this was all done by that guy Colby, the deputy on political issues. I'm not even sure that someone consulted with Rubio on this issue. There's an internal split in the White House, said McCall in a comment to Politico. Of course, no one consulted with the U.S. Embassy in Kyiv or with Keith Kellogg, with Trump's ambassador to Ukraine. Moreover, some members of the U.S. General Staff also protested against the stop of the help of Ukraine, writes Patilla. Let's stop separately from Medin. American military in uniform say that everything is fine with ammunition. Do not stop helping Ukraine, apparently because they understand that in the case of a defeat in Ukraine, there will be a security crisis for the whole of Europe, which will have to be regulated by the military itself. Let's get back to Vital. American and Ukrainian teams are now working on the organization of Trump and Zelensky's call. European officials who helped the process say that the call will be organized very soon. The episode emphasizes the excessive influence of Elbridge Colby in the Pentagon. This is due to one nuance, or rather Vital. Colby is one of the few officials in the Pentagon who is a career civil servant and has experience working in state agencies. Unlike other people who came to the Pentagon from the streets, the same Pete Hegseth was the TV presenter. Colby knows the underwater stones and the document of turnover that others do not even guess about. This allows him to push the decision by bypass. The unnamed ex-minister of the Pentagon commented on the situation as follows. The Pentagon's front office is empty, most people there have no experience in public service, and the same applies to the National Security Council. It is known that the very first re-establishment of military aid in Ukraine, which took place shortly after the inauguration of Trump, I am sorry, even before the scandal in the Oval Office, was undertaken by Pete Hegseth without knowing Trump. He did not even know about it. Reiter wrote about it in May. It is interesting that one of those who whispered to Hegseth about the need for the stop of aid to Ukraine, his senior advisor Dan Caldwell, has already been fired. This happened after the scandal with a leaked correspondence to the Signal about the coup d'etat. It is also interesting that Elbridge Colby heads the review of cooperation with Australia and Great Britain within the framework of AUKUS on the production of submarines. Some members of Trump's cabinet were surprised when they found out about this. Now the guy will also cover AUKUS with a copper basin, Badal notes. In general, for me, he writes, so far it looks like a continuous mess in the Pentagon, the self-actualization of certain people who are against Ukraine. To sum up, let's hope that something will be cleared up after Zelensky's and Trump's call, which will interfere with Rubio, Kellogg, and others, he hopes. The fact that Zelensky and Trump will discuss when stopping the supply of weapons in Ukraine is reported by Financial Times with a link to the unnamed sources. The conversation is scheduled for today, July 4, but the dates and time may change, the newspapers say. According to Financial Times, Zelensky will also raise the question about the possibility of buying weapons in the future. White House and the Office of the President of Ukraine did not answer the questions of the newspapers about the planned conversation. Although already now there is confirmation from Trump himself that this conversation will take place. But yesterday, it was unexpectedly known that Putin intends to call Trump. The conversation of the presidents lasted almost an hour. At the assistant of the president of Russia, Ashkov, Putin, in a conversation with Trump, noted the readiness of Russia to continue the negotiating process with Ukraine, quote, Ashkov TASS. Trump, in a conversation with Putin, again raised the issue of the fastest completion of military operations in Ukraine, said Ashkov. Negotiations in Istanbul will remain bilateral between Russia and Ukraine, he added. According to him, the specific dates of the third round of negotiations in Istanbul were not discussed. Putin said to Trump that Russia will not retreat from its goals to eliminate the cause of conflict in Ukraine, said Ushakov. In addition, he said that the topic of stopping the supply of weapons from the United States to Ukraine was not discussed. In addition to Ukraine, Putin and Trump discussed the situation around Iran and in the Middle East as a whole, according to Ushakov, the president of Russia. Congratulated Trump in advance on Independence Day, which is celebrated on July 4 in the United States. Apparently, Putin did not retreat from his maximalist demands despite the gift of Trump. In fact, Putin still demands Ukraine to capitulate. This means that, carefully expressed by me. Yesterday, the theory that against the background of stopping American supplies on the horizon, the contract was not justified. The fear is caused only by the fact that Trump found time to talk to Putin before the conversation with Zelensky about the supply of weapons, which somewhat complicates the task of the Ukrainian president, since we remember that Trump often repeats the thesis about who he talked to last. On the other hand, publicly Trump showed clearly displeasure with the results of the conversation. This, perhaps, for the first time after the conversation with Putin, Trump tells me about the great progress that he managed to achieve and vice versa about the fact that he did not manage to achieve anything. We talked about many things, including Iran, said Trump. We also talked, about the war with Ukraine. I'm not happy with this, I'm not happy. I didn't achieve any progress at all today, said Trump with clear irritation. Of course, progress cannot be achieved. Putin understands only the language of force and no other. In any case, in order for a complete picture to be formed, let's wait for Trump's conversation with Zelensky. Moreover, right before recording this report, he made the following statement: I will talk to Zelensky on Friday, that is, today, and I am very disappointed with the conversation with Putin. I do not see that he would like to stop, and this is very bad. The truth, I just say as it is, he does not look like a person who wants to end this war. Of course, this is not progress, this is a breakthrough that Trump comes to this understanding, because, as you remember, Trump publicly justified his actions and the slowdown of sanctions in relation to Russia and the lack of help to Ukraine was justified by the fact that he insisted that Putin wanted to end the war and he was close to the deal. Now he publicly spoke back. In any case, this is Trump, so the opinion can change very quickly, but this is more similar to the dynamics that was. I told you yesterday that I am embarrassed by the fact that this does not fit into the dynamics of the last few weeks in the stop in the arms of Ukraine. When, on the contrary, the relations with Zelensky and the relations with partners have improved, and there was a successful operation in Iran, which Trump inspired on the fact that the world through force is a normal option. In general, what Trump says now fits into the general model. But this stop in arms does not fit. That is why I see this rather than some malicious tactic with pressure on Ukraine, although there is certainly such an option, although what to press. Pressure on capitulation? Ukraine will not agree on this. The situation on the battlefield on Earth is completely different. Therefore, yes, it is more and more like a fool, just from the Pentagon side. In the best scenario, I see the decline in the issue of refusal to supply to Ukraine. Presumably, Zelensky explains what happened. Trump understands that all this was played out according to the scenario of one particular person and returns supplies. The worst option is that everything remains as it is. And then, I don't know, it gets worse, like they turn off the intelligence and so on. As always, it is necessary to hope for the best, but to prepare for the worst. And Europe and Ukraine should have been preparing for a long time. Trump promised to refuse supplies during the pre-election campaign. The fact that they lasted until July 2025 is a miracle, and the result is the incredible work of Ukrainian and European diplomats. Well, in order to strengthen Trump's feelings, Russia made a record strike on Ukraine, an airstrike after the conversation between Putin and Trump. Russian military, on Friday night, literally a few hours after the conversation between Trump and Putin, launched 550 drones and missiles in Ukraine, reported the Air Force of the Soviet Union. This is a record number of airstrikes used during the entire time of the war. The attack took place after the conversation between Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump, where the war in Ukraine was discussed, the agency notes. The previous record strike was inflicted by Russia less than a week ago. All night long, the Russians launched 539 drones and 11 missiles over Ukraine. The Air Force of the Armed Forces of Ukraine reported 63 drones and 9 missiles, 1 gun, 2 Iskander-KS and 6 Iskander-MS were not able to knock down. The main target of the attack was Kyiv, the Air Force of the Soviet Union reported. 23 people were injured in the Ukrainian capital, the mayor of the city, Vitaly Klitschko, reported. In 6 districts of the city, the damage of the fire was recorded. Mostly houses and cars were damaged, the Ukrainian Truth writes. Railway infrastructure was also damaged, which caused delays in the movement of trains. In addition, after the Russian attack in the city, there was a fire in the vicinity of Zhulian Airport. According to the number of drones used during the attack, this is a record strike during the entire time of the war. Previous record was set less than a week ago on Sunday, when Russia hit Ukraine with 537 UAVs and missiles. This time, according to the data of the Ukrainian Air Force, the military failed to knock down or suppress 13% of the total number of launched BPI missiles. 63 BPI and 9 missiles were not knocked down or suppressed. This is less than in the previous 2 days when the attacks were not record-breaking. On the night of July 3, 23% of the targets were not knocked down, and on July 2, 33%. However, more than during the previous record attack on Sunday night, when 11.5% of the targets were not knocked down or suppressed. All this is literally a few hours after Putin and Trump's talks. After the US deliveries were canceled, the Kremlin again feels that the threat has passed. And you cannot worry that America will react hard. Whether or not, we will see, because again, the statements that are made by Trump's country are pretty tough. It is important that the results of Trump's conversation with Zelensky are important. Will the entry of the Lindsey Graham project be given? Will the American deliveries be returned? But you can only hope for the strength of the defense of Ukraine. They will not betray and will not give up. Therefore, it is important to help them. Today we close the meeting immediately for 3 brigades, 110th, 56th, and 34th. Here's a message from one of them from 56th. We are military personnel of the 56th Mariupol Brigade who perform tasks in the Donetsk direction. We ask Mr. Michael to help with the production of drones for our unit. Glory to Ukraine, glory to heroes. Here is the QR code for the monobank. In the description there is a link to the monobank, to PayPal, to USDT RC20 and to Bitcoin, that is, to cryptocurrencies. Let's help the Ukrainian defenders. This is a combo of banks, we periodically hold them. A big meeting immediately for several brigades. I hope we can get together in the coming days. Thank you very much to everyone who participates in these meetings. You literally help save the lives of Ukrainian military and help Ukraine as a whole to stop the Russian offensive and stop this war. I, of course, will also participate in the meeting. Thanks to everyone who participates. This is what we can do right here and now, and what has a direct and serious effect on the defense of Ukraine, and so that Russia can kill less people. And in the future, in principle, it has ceased to have such an opportunity. Against the background of America's refusal to help, other contacts of Ukraine were activated, in particular with some Americans. Today, Ukraine has agreed with ex-CEO Google on the production of drones. Has agreed with Eric Schmidt on mass joint production of drones, said the current Minister of Defense of Ukraine, Rustem Umerov. He wrote the following in his social networks. Today in Denmark, a memorandum was signed with the General Director of the Swiftbit company Eric Schmidt on the scale of the production of unmanned systems for Ukraine. This is another important step towards our strategic goal to get technological advantage on the battlefield and systematically enhance the capabilities of the armed forces in the air. Memorandum provides long-term partnership and priority delivery of drones for Ukraine, large-scale production of interceptor drones, quadcopters and strike systems, development of new solutions for counteraction to cruise missiles and ballistic missiles. We are talking about hundreds of thousands of drones in 2025 with increased production in 2026. In particular, a large number of shacked interceptor drones, the effectiveness of which has already been proven in Ukraine. The main thing is that deliveries will be carried out under special conditions at the cost of production, he emphasized. And this is good news right from both ends. The first is that this is a new development in the cooperation system. And the second is that the Ukrainian authorities at the official level are increasingly recognizing the prospects for the technology of interceptor drones, for the promotion of which the Ukrainian armed forces, volunteers and military in particular. One of the most noticeable fighters for this is Sergei Sternenko, who has done quite a lot in order to collect funds for the development of this technology, to enrich the troops and draw the attention of officials and politicians to this technology, which is really critical for Ukraine now. The Swedish government will allocate funds to supply Ukraine with new guns for self-propelled artillery systems Archer. This was reported by the Swedish Minister of Defense Paul Johnson on Twitter. In addition, other weapons and equipment for military logistics will be provided. The government decided to allocate 1.5 billion Swedish krona, approximately 130 million euros, to new military opportunities for Ukraine. They include more than 10 new barrels for the AFU Archer, long-range strike weapons and submarines, as well as additional logistical support, Johnson noted. The AFU Archer, by the way, is a very cool story. One of the few examples when not weapons are delivered to Ukraine which were stored in warehouses, but the most modern, and the AFU Archer is one of them. The minister emphasized that the artillery system Archer, or 155 demonstrated high efficiency on the battlefield in Ukraine, now need to replace the trunks. Also, according to him, Volvo and Scania trucks will be purchased, as well as a new container system for faster and safer unloading of defense equipment. Trunks are generally an extremely important story. In high-intensity conflicts, such as the Russian-Ukrainian war, the trunks for artillery are actually a consumable, since frequent shooting leads to their wear, which, in turn, reduces accuracy and can lead to the explosion of the trunk at the most inappropriate moment. Of course, in many European countries on the brink of euphoria from the end of the Cold War, they managed to forget about it. So, Great Britain is only now resuming the production of trunks for the Gaubitz M777, which have been applied in Ukraine since the summer of 1922, and have probably managed to wear out quite a bit. So it's great that in Switzerland they took care of the production of new trunks for their super-modern wheeled sow, which predictably shows incredibly good results in Ukraine. By the way, the British Air Force and the US Air Force have published a report on the work of British ZRK Raven, recently created specifically for the defense of Ukraine and armed with air-to-air missiles AIM-132 ASRAAM. Ukrainian channels Vodagray brings screenshots, on one of which it can be seen that the ZRK turned out to be so effective that the marks on the hit targets are no longer placed on the cabin, just like the names of Russian soldiers on the memorials of the dead. Judging by the marks on the cabin, the calculations of the ZRK were hit at least 19 BPA type Orlan 10, 23 BPA type Zalazi 16, 17 BPA type Heron 2 Shehed, 10 BPA type Supercamp S350 beat-350M. One winged rocket counted in the channel. The calculations note the simplicity of the search for a target thanks to the ergonomic control organ. Judging by another screenshot, one of these control organs looks like a slightly complicated version of an ordinary gamepad, so many newcomers of the age of 40 will not be difficult to master it. In the occupied Lugansk, the SBU has liquidated the former occupation mayor of Lugansk, Monolis Pilavov, said the source of Ukrainian Truth in the SBU. He was in charge of this post from the end of 2014 to 2023. Earlier, the explosion in the center of Lugansk and the death of the former head of the city administration were reported by the Russian media with a reference to the occupation authorities. The source in the SBU reported that Pilavov died as a result of an explosion. He called him one of the ideologists of the self-proclaimed LPR. Since 2015, the victim has been under investigation by the SBU. He was accused of 3 articles. Actions aimed at building up the constitutional structure, the seizure of the state power, the violation of territorial integrity, and the creation of a terrorist organization. I don't think that Pilavov was such an important goal, just that the Ukrainian special services once again loudly reminded that the punishment for collaborationism in a certain form is inevitable, and this is important to remember. Ukrainian BPA continue to beat on the enterprises in Udmurtia, far away, I remind you, 1,300 km from the front line. On July 3, in the city of Serpol, an explosion rumbled after the attack of a drone. The attack fact was confirmed by the head of Udmurtia, Alexander Brichalov. According to him, the region was attacked by at least 2 drones. He added that the corresponding services are working in place of the incident. In the city is located the Sarapolsky Elektrogeneratorny Zavod, an important enterprise producing electric generators for the oil and gas industry and machine building. This object could probably be one of the targets of the attack. Locals report on the evacuation of factory workers after the explosion. The company has noticed enhanced security measures. According to eyewitnesses, mobile communication has disappeared in the city for a while. This may be a sign of the use of electronic warfare against drones. As we remember, in the past it only helped workers not be able to receive an air alert and evacuate on time. In addition, on the territory of the energy plant in the Yeltsilepetskaya region on the night of July 3, at least 12 unmanned vehicles fell, Astro sources reported to the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation. Earlier, it was announced that 10 BPAs were shot down overnight over the region. Earlier, Astro located the pictures of Chivtsa in place of the attack. The photo and video, the territory of the energy plant and its main building are really captured. The power energy plant specializes in the production of chemical sources of current. The production of the plant is widely used in various sectors, including the defense industry, civil aviation, sea transport, and energy complex. As Astro reported, the plant was already attacked on the night of May 23. As a result, one of the shops caught fire, 9 employees of the plant were injured. The defense forces of the south of Ukraine published a video where heavy quadcopters of about the same class as the bomber drones, called Baba Yaga in the Russian army, take off from the coast of Crimea from unoccupied boats. And then they dump ammunition on Russian radio stations. The video is remarkable in the fact that until now only FPV drones were launched from underwater UAVs. Ukrainian naval means of destruction continue to improve, but then, for some reason, the defense forces of the south deleted the video. Probably I was late and decided that it was too early to talk about such UAVs, but of course you can't delete anything from the internet. The video also flew on Z channels, so I also bring it here. Moreover, the main thing is not what is being beaten in Crimea, but the fact that there are no safe places on the peninsula. Yesterday in the Ukrainian Mosin project, the Cyberboroshnaya Dumana hinted that the Russians were silent about a blow to a certain airfield. Later, it became clear what was meant by the researchers. They published a photo of the Kolin airfield, which is near Kursk. As a result of a blow to the Kolin airfield, the air defense system was damaged, as well as, presumably, the armored personnel carrier, S-1, damaged. Analysts comment on the satellite photo published by them. There are also details about the recent exchange of Russian-Ukrainian strikes on command points between each other. As I told you yesterday about the death of the deputy commander of the Russian Navy, de facto commander of the 155th Brigade, headsman Gudkov. Though governor of Primorai Oleg Kazhemyako, having officially informed about Gudkov's death, said that along with him, his subordinate Colonel Nariman Shakaliev died. Telegram channel Papel Kursk suggests that Gudkov and Shakaliev died during a rocket strike on the command post of the 155th in Kornivo, the Kursk region, during which only 12 servicemen, including senior officers, were killed. This assumption received an independent confirmation. In Kornivo, 4 missiles hit the command post. More than 10 people were killed, many of them senior officers. This is a new trick. It's deputy commander of battalions and head of the service, rights, veteran organization Marpikov Taif. In addition, the channel of the spy dossier provides details of the Ukrainian attack on the headquarters of the Russian 8th Army in Donetsk, during which the commander of the army, Colonel Ruslan Goryachkin, died. As it turned out, not only him. On the 30th, 6th, and 25th, a missile strike on the command post of the 8th Army. Military Unit 33744 Novcherkassk writes a dossier of the spy. The strike was carried out by the Institute of Color Metal in the city of Donetsk as a result of a strike on 8 victims, including the commander of the army. 9 wounded and 4 missing. On the other hand, Ukrainian media and social networks have information that as a result of a missile strike on July 1, in which the commander of the 110th Mechanized Brigade, Colonel Sergei Zakharevich, and the deputy commander of the brigade, Dmitry Romaniuk, and the deputy commander of the brigade, Dmitry Romaniuk, it is another reminder that such high-precision blows in this war are not guaranteed by anyone. The only way to counteract is to hunt the launchers of Russian missiles and increase the pressure to at least contain their production. Well, let's finish this section with a good, although unconfirmed news. The author Lev Vershinin hints that in the near future the flow of Russian multi-star necrologues will not cease. The message about the death of Vice Admiral Ildar Akhmetov to the commander of the Navy is not true, writes he, but there is information about a heavy and successful strike on the Crimea, as a result of which several officers allegedly died. Very high rank of the Navy headquarters and a lot of equipment destroyed. These data have not yet been confirmed, so believe them. I am not in a hurry to expect official confirmation, which, if true, will certainly be, because it will not be possible to keep silent, writes he. We hope, together with Vershinin, for the best, i.e. lethal, exit for officers of the Black Sea Fleet and monitor the necrologues. The Ukrainian hero who died, including with the Russian strikes, eternal memory, and the Russian commander and officer, the earth is glassy, because the one who protects his country, the one who defends his state, his relatives and loved ones, is worthy only of honor, praise, and honor. The one who attacks and kills people in someone else's state is worthy only of universal and eternal shame, or better, forgetfulness. In the morning of July 3, a blow was delivered to Poltava and the land forces of the Soviet Union. They said that as a result of one of the flights, there was a fire in the building of the local Central Committee, that is, the military command. Later, the head of the command of the land forces, Vitaly Sarantsev, noted that there were only 2 hits. One on the territory of the city Central Committee, the second on the region. Yesterday at 6 p.m., the police reported that of 59 injured people, 2 more people were killed. At the same time, only 2 officers of the Central Committee were injured, and 2 more soldiers who were at the site of the hit. The detainees are fairly justified. Why didn't such strikes take place earlier? In the log of the war on exhaustion, it makes sense to disrupt the Ukrainian mobilization in this way. Apparently, the strikes on the Central Committee will continue. But firstly, a significant part of the process of mobilization in Ukraine has already been digitized. So the question is how much the physical defeat of the centers of equipment will affect it. Secondly, this game can also be played together. Russian military commandos at a depth of 1,000 kilometers from the border, where most of the population of Russia lives, are not inviolable, and their employees are far from immortal. There is a hypothesis that Russia thus wants to strengthen the situation in the Ukrainian society, because, to put it mildly, those who mobilize people for war do not use the popularity among the population. Part of this antagonism is created artificially. Sometimes TCK employees really exceed the powers and there are questions to them. However, Russian propaganda blows up every such case as much as possible. The strategy is clear and logical. The more it is possible to create hatred for the TCK, the more difficult it will be for Ukraine to complete the army, the higher the chances for Russia to break through the Ukrainian defense and capture the country. Another thing is that the strikes on the TCK, in my opinion, will cause a reverse effect, because there is a frequent complaint against the employees of the structure that they take people for war, and they sit with their asses in comfortable cabinets, which is not quite true, because in the TCK now often work soldiers who have been wounded on the front and demobilized. In any case, Russian strikes show that the TCK is what helps to fight with the Russian Federation, and that their employees are also in danger and are a direct target for the Russians. Therefore, there is a feeling that if Russia has this account and creates additional antagonism, then they act in an absolutely opposite direction. In the Donetsk region, the Russians delivered a double blow to the rescuers who came to liquidate the consequences of the previous attack, told in the GSC of Ukraine, the so-called double tap. Call this tactic the Russian army worked out in Syria, hitting the volunteers of the Syrian civil defense and also the white helmets, who were in place of the previous Russian blows to extinguish the fires and take people out of the rubble. Now Russian armed forces is using the same criminal tactic against the Ukrainian rescuers. The means of defeat have changed, but the basis remained unchanged. The reconnaissance drone monitors the place of the blow, and as soon as rescuers arrive there, that is, civilians civilian targets, another attack is carried out. This is how it was told in the GSC. In Donbas, Russian troops brutally attacked the rescuers. Fire equipment was damaged. During the liquidation of the consequences of the enemy shelling on the private residential building of the sector in the Drishkov community, the occupants purposely, using a drone, chopped off the rescuers. Fortunately, the personnel did not get hurt. The firefighters stopped the work in time and walked away at a safe distance. The fire truck was damaged. A shock wave knocked out the windows and deformed the car compartment. Such nasty actions of the enemy are demonstrated by its cynicism. Despite constant threats, the rescuers continue to perform their duties. And indeed, once again, we would like to note the heroism of the Ukrainian rescuers. Moving on to the front line. Ukrainian serviceman Stanislav Bunyatov talks about Ukrainian counterattacks on the Sumy direction. The Russians are carrying colossal losses on Sumy and they are drawing up reserves in the fire, he writes. The aviation regularly drops the cables and applies all kinds of weapons in order not to lose positions. Our stormtroopers, despite the losses, are fighting for the region's second chance at a peaceful life, says Bunyatov. Ukrainian war developer Konstantin Mashevets also reports about Ukrainian counterattacks, clarifying that they took place in the north of Andriivka, in the east of Unikovka, in the northeast of Sadkov, and in total they managed to free 4 square kilometers. In fact, this is the trend that was intended for the current Russian offensive in the Sumy region. It is stopped and Ukraine is counterattacking. Well, how is it stopped? Stabilized? Let's call it that. I made a separate video about this, and yesterday I made a comprehensive video about the entire Russian offensive. All fronts at the moment, what is going on there and where. See if you want to fully understand what is going on now and why this offensive is so important for Russia and so important for Ukraine. At the same time, the command of the Russian armed forces, according to Mashevtsev, transfers individual units of the Sumchina and Tyatkin in the Gushkovsky district of the Kursk region, where they managed to repel the Ukrainian forces to the state border at 150 meters. To do this, they had to use the 106th Airborne Division, so its movement in the other direction is postponed. Konstantin Mashevets also reports that the simultaneous offensive of the Russian forces on Myrnohrad and Kostyantynivka from the March at the junction of the Pokrovsko and Tortsko directions. It's been greatly slowed down in recent days, but at the site, the Ukrainian defense forces are unlikely to have opportunities for counterattacks. On the western flank of the direction, the Russian armed forces are trying to break through into the Dnipropetrovsk region, or at least go out on the edge of Muravka, Novoniklivka, Mashevets says. In the critical direction for the VSU in the South Donetsk region, Deep Street records the movement of the Russians in Zerka, as well as in the area of Andriivka and Baghtria. Konstantin Mashevets points out that in the south of Donetsk, Anizhino-Pavlovsk, in his terminology of the direction, Ukrainian troops are suffering a very sensitive defeat, without having the opportunity to stop the enemy, the pace of which is up to 10-12 square kilometers per day. Pay attention to the square kilometers, not kilometers. If the situation does not change, it predicts the emergence of a threat for Pavlograd, Dnipropetrovsk region, and for the neighboring Zaporozhye direction. Now let's move on to the Toretskaya direction. On it, in Deep State, they write about the progress of the Russians in the Nelipovka region. Konstantin Mashevets says that the Russian troops are advancing to Yablanovka, Katarinovka, and the White Mountain in order to bypass the Ukrainian fortifications in Cherbanovka and the surrounding areas. However, according to his assessment, now Russian armed forces is conducting regrouping in the direction. And therefore, the intensity of Russian attacks has decreased from 6 to 8 per day. There is also some kind of activation in the Zaporozhye direction. In the last days, the State Department again notes the progress of Russian troops in Kamensk. Stanislav Bunyatov talks about the features of the recently resumed battles in this direction, in particular in the Kamensk region. This is what he writes in his Telegram channel. In the Kamensk direction, small SH Sherbaki and SRF carry out a crawling offensive. Assault actions occur mainly in the gray zone by small groups in the Pontchathermal visions. The main pressure on Kamensk is not allowed by the Russians for the offensive. Our birds do not allow this. Russian armed forces have low quality and carry high losses, but due to the number of units of the Ukrainian defense forces, they achieve certain results. Thanks to everyone who keeps the defense and continues the fight. Zaporozhye has become a home for many refugees and the last chance for adequate asylum. If there are defeats in this direction, hundreds of thousands of people will have to leave the country. After all, it is almost impossible to survive the current tariffs and housing prices in other regions of Ukraine, warns Bunyatov. As for Kharkov region, Konstantin Mashevets reports that the VSRF was activated in Volchansk in the Kharkov direction, moving in the city line of 200-300 meters. In turn, the Ukrainian Defense Force managed to pull out the Russian forces outside the state border of the northern village of Vysokaya Yuruga, says the analyst. The VSRF also attacks the cursed village under Kubansk. Well, what kind of cursed village is this? In the Kubansk direction, it is noted the progress of the Russian troops in the area, as you probably understood, Sinkovka to the northeast of Kubansk. This is one of the most cursed settlements for the Russian army. The Russians have not been able to take it since 1923. And now, apparently, they decided to try again to get to Kubansk, not only from the north, but also from the northeast. I remember how they took Sinkovka more than once, but only in their dreams. The channel publishes an infographic of the number of clashes at the front, according to the General Staff of the Soviet Union. The number of Russian attacks remains at a relatively low level. It increased by 1% compared to the previous week, with 155 assaults a day. This is still a lot, but for comparison, in mid-June, the average number of Russian attacks was 193. Interestingly, the number of attacks in the South Donetsk and Pokrovsk regions increased by 11.6%, respectively, but in Sumchina, on the contrary, it fell immediately by 35%. The Russian armed forces, they're still trying to reanimate the offensive, but not so intensively. Meanwhile, in the pool of the Blackbird Group community, the area occupied by the Russians of the territory was calculated and came to the results directly opposite of what they received in Deep State. According to their calculations, in June, Russian armed forces captured 423 square kilometers of the territory of Ukraine, which is about 20% less than in May, when they calculated 538 occupied square kilometers below. That is, the Russian offensive, according to their data, slowed down. According to the Deep State data, which I brought, including in yesterday's video about the Russian offensive, in June, the Russians occupied 556 square kilometers of the Ukrainian territory, approximately 20% more than in May, when the occupied territory area was 449 square kilometers. That is, the Russian offensive, on the contrary, accelerated. It is clear why this happened. Obviously, Deep State did not write something out of the blue for a long time, so they wrote it out of the blue not in May, but in June, and the Blackbird Group, on the contrary. Well, that is, if you explain in more detail, the information of Deep State in many ways determined the tone of my yesterday's video, but the new information has led me to new thoughts, about which I will now talk in more detail. Firstly, it is obvious that everything depends on the methodology. Different analysts have a sufficient amount of data to record a certain promotion of the Russians. Zetniks, like a cream caprice, generally often paint a certain territory on the first flag, and in Deep State, for example, there is also a confirmation from the fighters of the defense force. I don't know how Blackbird is organized, so I won't say that this or that methodology is better. I just want to note that control is most often determined with the accuracy of plus a village, which already has a very serious impact on the results of the study, if we are talking about a slow Russian offensive, where they take conditionally 2-3 villages in one direction per month. From here, apparently this very error of 20% is taken, so it seems to me that based on the data of both Deep State and Blackbird, it is incorrect to say that the Russian offensive was accelerated or, accordingly, slowed down. It would be correct to say that the tempo of the Russian advance was approximately at the same level, but if they will, let's hope, decrease conditionally by 2 times, then it will be possible to talk about a serious change in the situation at the front. But this change in the situation at the front is in every way contributed by the GOR. The hunt for Russian drone operators, which have recently been started by the Z-Men, is gaining momentum and becoming more and more organized. Talked about a complex operation to eliminate Russian aircraft carriers in the Zaporozhye direction in the GOR, writing the following: Priority Hunt Department of Active Action of the GOR of the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine, and the command of the Air Force's 128th Separate Mountain Assault Brigade, 128th Separate Brigade of Turgorod. Department of Flight School, the forces of the unmanned systems, together with the ATU, Zaporozhye, and the ASU, Tavria, arranged a month of the annihilation of Russian drone operators. During the operation Dronosit, at the sites of the responsibility of the Zaporozhye front, the fighters of the Ukrainian units identified 9 positions, the place of residence of enemy operators of strike and reconnaissance drones. 42 objects were destroyed and damaged, where the Russian killers settled. In the form of unique frames of transformation into molecules of position with Moscow-like fangs, the armed struggle for Ukraine continues. The glory of Ukraine, they write, the hero of the glory. Defense forces clearly intend to maintain superiority over the drones, conveying the principle of beating by the archers and not by the arrows. Moreover, each Russian archer and drone operator is a valuable specialist, which is more difficult to train than the one-time assault of the VK. We wish the Russian pilots the further successes of the Russian army to send more drone operators into meat assaults, as they sometimes like. The third assault aircraft demonstrated the capabilities of ground drones. One of them stole a machine gun from the Russian position. That's what they told the brigade about, an art film or a tactical theft of a machine gun from the Russian positions. With the help of the surveillance means of the fighters of the 3rd Assault Brigade, they noticed that it was installed by the enemy PKM on the NRC. On the ground robotic system, they drove 450 meters deep into the enemy positions. While the occupant was knocking on the door, a machine gun was tactically stolen. The operation was performed by the NRC 13th 2nd Assault Battalion Brigade fighters. The same Sergei Flash Biskresnov says that ground drones have no less potential than flying BPAs, and predicts that the further stage of development of UAVs will be focused on ground drones. For Ukraine, this is a way to at least soften the problem of chronic lack of personnel. Robots can not only steal machine guns, but also, for example, fire on the enemy with the improvement of the technology of machine vision. They can do this with minimal part of the operator. But the endless story of how in the Russian army they make fun of the soldiers becomes so similar to each other that it already seems that they are generated by some kind of artificial intelligence, if each of them was not told by real people. Sergei, a former soldier, told about the limitlessness of the unit, in particular about corruption, beatings, and blackmail. During the fighting, he received post-traumatic stress disorder and psychosis, because of which he could not continue his service. He went to the police station, which recognized him as unfit for military service. However, during a repeated examination, he was unexpectedly put in the category of goody. In 2 months, I lost weight up to 48 kg. That is, from any body movement, from any phrase that is not suitable for you. Well, for me, at least, yes. I got angry. I had a strong irritation in the sense that I was right. Sergei's health condition began to deteriorate. Despite this, he continued to be on the front line. According to him, the commanders ignored the category established by the Military Medical Commission and left him on the front line. The command's address was not given any results. Moreover, after the complaint, he was beaten up. I came, the commander of the company shows it all. He says, "What, you decided to break up?" We had a fight with the company and his colleagues who were drinking with him all this time. There were 3 adults. We fought for him. In the end, I was the only one against the 3 of them. He said that there were constant demands in the unit, even for the dismissal. According to his words, he was required to pay the commanders. Sergei clarified that he gave almost all his salary, and in 7 months he gave them almost 4 million rubles so that he would not be sent to the front line. He said that because of the lawlessness in the unit and the criminal actions of the command, he was forced to run to Armenia, first paying the commander for permission to leave the SVO zone. Also, he told about the great losses of the units, according to his words. From his company, which had 360 live soldiers, only 81 people remained. The commander of the battalion, who was put, he got drunk, threw grenades, and a shrapnel flew to his 5th point. And he made himself like 3 million for what? For the fact that he was drunk and threw grenades. It was opened by a staff officer, after which, the next day, Nikita miraculously did not become. He was just shot with a trophy gun. But everyone was told that they were allegedly accidentally hit with a machine gun. The last hope of getting into prison, which is even in Russia, disappeared from the Russian deserters from Sochnikov and still better than the local assaults. Those who fled from the Russian military almost ceased to be arrested. Detainees were sent to the assault units. In Russia, almost all the detainees were not arrested. The military was declared to be in search of a part of the detainees. Article 337 follows from the massive data about the detainees on this article, which Versk handed over to the military prosecutor's office. Over the last month, more than 1,000 servicemen were detained throughout the country who were in search of a part of the detainees. More than 10 of them were sent under arrest. Most of them were formally released under the Don't Go Out registration by initiators of the search for commanders of military units, by officers of the military prosecutor's office, military commandant's office. The military police, according to the data, as the interlocutor of the military prosecutor's office explained, the Ministry of Defense is trying to bring back as many military officers as possible to the front. They return to the unit for self-defense, and there, where they can, someone is immediately taken to the front to be sent to the assault. Others can be marinated in pits and improvised prisons on the territory of the units or the commandant's office. They are forced to sign an agreement for the assault, or they try to sell it to other commanders, which in any case will then throw them to the ground, he said. According to the source, everything is processed through the guidance of the command, which asks to stop the investigation. Criminal cases do not stop, but they are stopped by the investigation. This information was confirmed by Versk by the lawyer from the movement Conscious Rescuers, Artem Klyga. According to his words, for this purpose, amendments were used, which were introduced in the Supreme Court, allowing to stop the consideration of the criminal case. On the return to the front and the sending of assault units, Versk was also told by several military people, which are now on the front line. Astrakhan Strangler went to the SVO, another replenishment of the new elite. Astrakhan Strangler, Vagan Safarian, on account of which 3 proven victims went to the SVO. According to this shot, the criminal case against the serial killer has been suspended. According to the source, the previously detained killer of the 64-year-old Vagan Safarian in the spring of this year signed a contract and was in the SVO zone in the assault units. The criminal case against him under the article of the murder of 2 and more people has been suspended since April 29. Earlier, the shots reported that in 1993, at that time, the 32-year-old Vagan Safarian fled from the capital of Azerbaijan, Baku, from the First Karabakh War. He came to Russia, settled in Astrakhan, signed a contract and got a job as a taxi driver. In 1995, he got married. In 1997, his daughter was born, and in 1998, he committed the first murder and immediately a double one. For 45,000 rubles, he strangled a 67-year-old woman and her 37-year-old daughter. Safarian, the Astrakhan soulmate, died at the age of 19 due to a murder committed in 2004. It was a robbery against a person who had a card debt to Safarian, so another replenishment of the new elite. That's all for now. It was Michael Nacke. Goodbye.
С вами был Майкл Наки. Всего доброго. Пока.